My name is Lily Anderson. I'm 29, and I never imagined a normal Thursday morning could crack the foundation of my life. I'd been with Ryan Wright, 30, for almost 4 years, living together for 2. On paper, we were the perfect couple, shared responsibilities, matching routines, and enough inside jokes to fill a small book. But perfection, I was about to learn, is often just a thin veneer over chaos. Ryan had started therapy about 8 months ago. It was his idea, though I had encouraged it when work stress began consuming him. His boss was relentless, and Ryan, ever the conscientious employee, carried his anxiety home like a second coat. At first, the sessions seemed to help. He came home talking about boundaries, self-care, and the tools his therapist, Dr. Whitlock, suggested. I was proud of him, genuinely. Seeing him energized, feeling lighter, I thought maybe this would deepen our relationship. But around month 3, something shifted. Every session, somehow, turned into a discussion of me. Dr. Whitlock supposedly said, "You exhibit controlling behavior because you ask about Ryan whereabouts. Your need for a tidy home may actually be about power dynamics." The words sounded absurd at first, but over time, Ryan started echoing them back at me. Asking if I wanted takeout became controlling. Leaving dishes in the sink for 2 days was a power play. Concern when he stayed late at work or didn't answer texts? Toxic. I began noticing the small ways he tiptoed around the apartment, hesitant to speak, his eyes darting like he might step on invisible landmines. I tried to talk to him, suggested couples therapy so we could navigate this together. He shot it down immediately. Dr. Whitlock says that's what controlling partners always suggest, to manipulate the narrative, he explained, almost apologetically. Walking on eggshells became routine. I stopped mentioning household chores. I quietly did everything myself. I started spending more time with my friend Theo, just to breathe. And then, one Tuesday evening, after a long shift managing logistics for a medical supply company, I came home to Ryan sitting on the couch, his therapy journal clutched like a shield. "Lily, I need to share something important from today's session," he said. His voice was calm, rehearsed. I sat down, curious, heart quietly pounding. We had been doing deep work on his anxiety, and apparently the breakthrough was here. He paused for effect, tilting his head slightly. "It's you." I blinked. "Excuse me?" Dr. Whitlock had diagnosed me as the primary source of his anxiety, he said. All the support, all the sacrifices, all the laughter and late-night talks over microwaved meals, it boiled down to me being the villain in his therapy narrative. 4 years of loving him, helping him navigate career changes, family drama, and emotional upheaval. And this was my reward. "I see," I said softly. He expected protest, begging, maybe an argument. But instead I stood, walked to the bedroom, and began packing a duffel bag. "What are you doing?" His journal still clutched like armor. "Solving your problem," I said, folding shirts carefully. "If I'm the source of your anxiety, the solution seems straightforward." "That's not—" "Dr. Whitlock says we need to work through this together. You can't just leave," he protested. "Actually, I can, and I am." I collected my laptop, chargers, documents from the filing cabinet, everything essential. The apartment was in his name anyway. Moving out was seamless. His panic started to edge his voice. "Lily, this is exactly the kind of dramatic reaction Dr. Whitlock warned me about. You're proving her point." "Maybe," I said quietly, "or maybe I'm just done being someone's therapeutic punching bag." I left a note on the counter, problem solved. I'll stop by Saturday for the rest of my things. Please be out. And with that, I drove straight to Theo's place. He didn't ask questions, just handed me a beer and pointed toward the spare room. Sometimes a friend is all the therapy you need. By the time I checked my phone 19 hours later, messages had begun to pour in, frantic, alternating between anger and pleading. Ryan Panic was a mix of love bombing and guilt tripping, revealing layers of insecurity I hadn't fully seen before. But I stayed calm, measured. I had made my choice. I realized then, as I sipped the lukewarm beer Theo had ignored on purpose, that loving someone sometimes means letting them go, especially when they cast you as the villain in a story you didn't write. The cracks in our life together were no longer invisible, and I, Lily Anderson, was finally stepping out of the debris of his self-created chaos, taking my calm with me. The first 24 hours after I left were like watching a storm from a distance. I could see it brewing, hear the wind in the trees, but I wasn't part of it anymore. Ryan texts began slowly, angry, incredulous, desperate. "This is so immature. You can't just abandon me like this. Emotional manipulation." I didn't respond. I had nothing to defend, nothing to explain. I had only followed the words he had spoken, the very truth he claimed. I was the source of his anxiety. By the next morning, his panic escalated. 15 missed calls, messages asking where the bills were, where the router was, even where he could find his insurance cards. I had handled all of that for months because he found it overwhelming, and now he expected me to solve it from a distance. "You know where everything is," I typed internally, reminding myself to stay calm. "But I won't step back into this cycle." And then came the texts about money. His car needed an oil change. Registration had expired. "Why didn't you renew it?" he asked, as if my leaving instantly erased his adult capabilities. He was 29, old enough to navigate his own life, but for a moment I could almost see him unraveling under the pressure he had built himself. The next level of chaos came from Ryan's ex-girlfriend, Veronica, who had always hovered at the edges of our lives. I could feel her fingerprints in the background. The vague social media posts, the healing journey captions, subtle jabs masked as inspirational thoughts. Suddenly, Ryan wasn't just texting me. He was texting Veronica, forwarding my absence like a weapon of guilt. Then Patricia, his mother, entered the storm. Voicemails, texts, and calls started arriving. "Lily, what has gotten into Ryan? This is not how adults handle problems. He's devastated. Call immediately." I reminded myself. Calm, measured, untouchable. Ryan's dependence on others' intervention only revealed the pattern I had ignored for too long. He had been conditioned to avoid responsibility for his own emotions. By the second day, I had settled into a rhythm of observation. Ryan messages were now frantic mixtures of pleading, panic, and thinly veiled threats. I may have miscommunicated what my therapist said. "Please come home. We need to talk." It was like watching someone thrash in quicksand, every move deeper into desperation, further from the truth. My own life, once subsumed by his anxiety, now stretched before me like a calm ocean. I could breathe again. That evening, I reflected on how manipulative patterns could escalate when unchecked. Small requests, small acts of care had been reframed as control. My concern, my love, had been weaponized against me. Ryan texted again. "How am I supposed to afford this place on my own? Rent is due. I can't manage without you." The irony was delicious. He was always the one to dismiss practicality, the one to assume I would carry the bulk of our shared responsibilities. Now I realized it wasn't anger I felt, it was clarity. Finally, the mask had slipped. By Thursday, the storm reached its peak. Social media posts painted me as cold, uncaring, the villain in Ryan's life. Friends sent subtle messages of support to him, oblivious to the reality. He had created this chaos himself. Even his ex-girlfriend, Veronica, seemed to thrive on the unfolding drama. And yet I remained grounded. I documented everything silently. Screenshots of texts, photos of bills, notes on conversations. Everything was evidence, not for revenge, but for clarity and, if necessary, protection. That night, as I poured a cup of tea and looked out of Theo's apartment window, I realized the truth. Loving someone doesn't mean letting yourself be trapped in a story that isn't yours. Ryan's storm raged, but I was no longer inside it. I could watch, learn, and, if necessary, step aside without guilt. I closed my eyes and let the tension slip from my shoulders. The emotional chaos of his dependence, the manipulations of ex-girlfriends and mothers, the frantic panic, all of it was no longer my responsibility. For the first time in years, I felt free. By Saturday morning, the storm Ryan had conjured around himself had started spilling into public spaces. It wasn't just texts and panicked calls anymore. It was posts on social media, forwarded messages to our mutual friends, and even attempts to involve our workplace. I learned quickly that chaos has a way of amplifying itself when left unchecked. Ryan's ex-girlfriend, Veronica, seemed to orchestrate the narrative from the sidelines. Vague posts about heartbreak, self-care, and emotional distress appeared across his network, each one crafted to make me look cold, uncaring, and manipulative. Every friend who commented on her post seemed unaware that they were reacting to a distorted story. The real shock came when he decided to pull our shared social circle into his panic. Mutual friends sent me concerned messages, some genuinely worried, others subtly questioning why I had abandoned him. I read them all silently, documenting, making mental notes, and refusing to respond. Responding would have only pulled me back into the storm. Then Patricia, Ryan's mother, became a force of chaos in her own right. She showed up at his workplace under the guise of concern. "Lily, this has gone far enough," her voicemail had warned. "Ryan is distraught. You need to make this right." I ignored the calls at first, knowing that showing up would only escalate the situation further, but it was impossible to ignore completely. Patricia's intervention revealed something I had already begun to understand. Ryan had built an emotional network to buffer himself from responsibility, and each person he pulled in added fuel to the fire. Meanwhile, I kept my distance, quietly observing. I could see the pattern forming. Ryan panic, Veronica's manipulations, and Patricia's insistence on control were converging in a perfect storm of public drama. My phone buzzed with messages from strangers, mutual acquaintances, and even colleagues who had heard fragments of the story. Some offered sympathy. Others unknowingly reinforced the narrative that I was the villain. I started noticing a pattern. Ryan Panic had created a performance. His fear, frustration, and anger were no longer private. They were designed to elicit reactions, attention, and guilt. Every post, every forwarded text, every frantic call was a carefully calculated step to manipulate perception. Veronica even tried to involve people professionally. Theo, my friend, warned me that she had contacted someone at her wellness center to spread her version of the story. It was subtle at first, half-truths disguised as concern, but it was enough to muddy the waters. And yet I remained calm. I documented everything: screenshots of posts, copies of messages, detailed notes on interactions. I didn't need anyone to understand immediately. I only needed the truth on my side, a record of reality against the chaos. By the end of the weekend, I realized that this storm wasn't just about Ryan anxiety. It was about control, perception, and manipulation. He had carefully orchestrated a narrative where I was the source of all conflict, while positioning himself as the victim. And Veronica, ever the opportunist, was eager to reinforce that story. But the calm inside me was growing stronger than the chaos outside. I had finally learned that my role in someone else's drama could end the moment I chose, and for the first time, I saw clearly. I wasn't responsible for fixing Ryan Panic, nor for repairing the tangled web of manipulation he had spun around himself. The storm would rage on, but I had stepped out of it. By Monday morning, the chaos had reached its peak. Ryan's social media posts, forwarded messages, and frantic calls had created a web of misunderstanding and drama that threatened to ensnare anyone who stepped near it. But I was no longer stepping near it. I was walking through it, fully aware, fully composed. Ryan had sent dozens of texts overnight, each one swinging between desperate love bombing and veiled threats. "Lily, you're breaking me. Please, we need to talk. You can't leave me like this." I didn't respond. I had nothing to fix. I had spent 4 years giving, supporting, and understanding, only to be recast as the villain in someone else's story. Now it was his turn to face the consequences. And then Patricia appeared, this time in person, at my workplace no less. Security had called me down to the lobby, and there she was, designer purse clutched tightly, eyes sharp and accusing. "Lily, this has gone far enough," she hissed. "Ryan is distraught. You need to make this right." I stayed calm. Every inch of me radiated control, even as my heart ticked faster under the pressure. Not my problem, I reminded myself. Her fury was someone else's chaos, and I would not take it on. "Patricia," I said evenly, "I left because Ryan told me I was the source of his anxiety. I acted on what he explicitly said. I am not responsible for anyone else's panic." Her eyes narrowed, but I held her gaze. I could see the moment she realized that I wasn't flinching, wasn't begging, wasn't yielding. I was untouchable, grounded in the truth. Later that day, I met Ryan for what he insisted was a final talk. I arrived prepared, everything documented, everything clear. He tried to plead, to guilt me, to twist words into obligation, but I didn't falter. "You wanted me to be the source of your anxiety," I said calmly. "Mission accomplished. I am no longer part of your problem." He stammered. "That's not what I meant. Dr. Whitlock says we need to—" "Dr. Whitlock has nothing to do with this anymore," I interrupted. "I am done being someone's therapeutic punching bag. Your anxiety is your responsibility. Mine is my life, my peace, and my boundaries." The desperation on his face was almost cinematic. I could see him trying to process that the woman he thought he could control, manipulate, and guilt had refused to be manipulated any longer. Then came the confrontation with Patricia again, later that afternoon. She insisted that Ryan deserved better. I agreed, just not in the way she expected. He deserved someone who wouldn't let themselves be cast as a villain, someone who wouldn't shoulder the blame for his unresolved issues. That someone was not me anymore. Ryan panic peaked one last time. Tears, frantic words, a desperate attempt at love bombing. But the mask had slipped. Beneath the pleading, I saw fear, fragility, and entitlement. He had built a narrative of victimhood around himself, and now it was collapsing. As I walked away from him, leaving his panic and Patricia's fury behind, I felt the first real weightlessness I had known in years. I wasn't running, I was rising. The final confrontation wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about clarity, boundaries, and the knowledge that I had preserved my integrity while others spiraled into their own chaos. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled, fully aware that I had won not by fighting, but by refusing to be anyone else's emotional hostage. By the following week, the storm Ryan had conjured around himself began to settle, but not for him. Social media posts, forwarded messages, and frantic calls had created chaos in his life, but I had stepped entirely out of it. Veronica, Ryan's ex-girlfriend, continued her attempts to manipulate and influence, but the consequences of her interference soon became apparent. Attempts to involve mutual friends and acquaintances backfired. People who had initially sympathized with Ryan began seeing the pattern. He had built a narrative of victimhood while pushing responsibility onto everyone around him. Even Patricia, after realizing that her interventions hadn't changed anything, eventually backed off. She could see that I was immovable in my boundaries, no longer susceptible to guilt or manipulation. Ryan panic extended to his workplace. Colleagues who had been swept into the drama realized the story was exaggerated, if not entirely fabricated. His frantic calls, social media posts, and emotional manipulation began to damage his reputation. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my life, untangling myself from the chaos, and reclaiming the energy I had long sacrificed. Theo became my anchor, a steady presence that reminded me of loyalty, friendship, and grounded support. Then came the karmic payback. Ryan's apartment, which he had relied on me to manage financially, became a source of embarrassment and logistical headache. His attempts to recruit friends, colleagues, and even his mother to help only highlighted the chaos he had created. Veronica faced consequences of her own. Her wellness coaching venture, which had relied on projecting authority and control, faltered. Clients began noticing inconsistencies, and her attempts to maintain influence over Ryan's narrative failed spectacularly. She had misjudged the ripple effect of manipulation. The very people she had tried to control turned away, leaving her exposed and struggling. For me, the emotional payoff wasn't public recognition or revenge. It was peace. I had reclaimed my autonomy, walked away from a toxic dynamic, and refused to let manipulation dictate my life. I started therapy with a real professional, someone who listened without projecting blame or twisting reality. And for the first time, I realized that love doesn't mean sacrifice at the cost of your own sanity. Weeks later, I saw Ryan in public, and there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, as if he understood, finally, that the storm had passed, and that he had only himself to blame for the chaos. He had to navigate the aftermath of his actions, fractured social relationships, public embarrassment, and the reality that his panic and manipulations no longer controlled anyone around him. Veronica tried reaching out one last time, claiming growth and the desire for reconciliation, but I didn't respond. I had learned that some sources of anxiety are best left in the past. The final, quiet satisfaction came in knowing that I had survived, intact and unbroken, while others had unraveled under the weight of their own making. Boundaries had been set, respect had been reclaimed, and my life, my story, was mine to write. Sometimes, the best response to being told you are someone's problem is simple: step out of the equation. And that is exactly what I did.